Good morning. Sunday school money. I'll set it up here. I'll deliver. Leah, good to see you this morning.
It's okay. Yeah, I wish we'd done a little while more past here, so. I got my score on the first one, so. It was a 95.
You got the high score.
Yeah.
You got the high score. Very good.
Got Leah.
That was him.
You just said that. Screen's over real high. Computer is trying to turn on. It's thinking about it.
Hello, Heather. Hey, new chords.
Yeah.
Oh, I like it.
Short stretch the left, see that one line.
I like it. Oh, man, those look nice.
You can tell one's red and one's green.
I didn't see it.
Color coded, yeah.
Taking us 30 years.
Morning, morning. Yeah, those are nice. What brand are those? Yeah, I know, that's what I can.
Saturday this morning.
Yeah, I saw it, I saw it. Well,
You know, I've got a bench that I'll donate to. It's an editor. We can donate that bench. It's a little piano bench. It's got Disney princesses on it.
and it might add your height.
No, she won't. She's gotten everything out of that room that she wants.
Yeah, I got that problem in my office, Taylor had got everything out there at once, so you won't come get it.
Anna, if you're watching, we've been having a month-long clean out so I can use her room as my office when I'm working from home. Use it as a spare bedroom, so it's been an ongoing endeavor. Prayer requests this morning. What do you guys have on your mind this morning?
Well, Debbie and Kelly are on our church prayer list today.
Okay. Keep the Wilkins on our prayer list, especially today.
I had Joe Young family, his wife died.
Yeah, COVID. Yeah. Ruth?
Ruth.
Ruth,
Mhm.
yes.
Actually, it's, the Hazelwood family.
Yes.
Yeah. I think we need to keep Hudson on.
Hudson Pace?
Yes.
Continue prayer for him as he goes to cancer treatments. I had a friend in South Carolina who took his life this week. I don't know why, I don't know any details, I don't know anything. It bugged me all. And I were real good friends for quite some time. Don't know what happened. His name was Paul.
Mom has had her first vaccine shot
Oh,
on Friday. It's not effects from it, and doing well, and it's playing on Thursday, and then now she's on Zoom.
Yeah.
I've been watching.
Where's she going?
About to have a party.
Yeah.
I figured very good.
Well, that's who administered it. It was at the middle school, meeting.
Yeah, somebody told me they had 8 people giving shots there, and it was just really quick.
It was a well-oiled machine. Travis was a door breeder.
Oh, was he really?
Yeah.
I'm certainly tired of losing people because of it. I'm absolutely tired of it. Anybody else? Any other prayer requests? Praise reports. Hey, what's been going on good this week? Don't say the weather because, well, we know rain's part of spring, so. But
2 weeks ago today, it was frigid.
a week ago today, we were dodging ice in the parking lot.
Exactly. And today, we stepped out and the robins are singing and the tree frogs are chirping.
Easter flowers are coming up.
It's just-
Sandra's got her patio ready to invite us all over to come hang out.
I'm ready for spring.
We had a cardinal this morning fight himself in a stainless steel grill. Yeah,
He was either winning or losing.
I'll post it in a while.
I think he was losing.
Sounded to me like he beat his brains out.
Does it? Go ahead.
Yeah, 3-year-olds.
I know.
That's a great. Yeah.
It's also fair.
Yes. That's understood, Robert.
I praise the Lord, I can praise the Lord.
There, look at it. That's a big deal. No, and now he's wincing. It's part of the process. All right, let's go to the Lord in prayer this morning. Christian, you might open this one.
Lord, we're so thankful for little things like being able to raise our arms and have 3-year-olds and all the things that you have done for us. We are too numerous to mention. We think of those, Lord, that are hurting right now, that have lost loved ones, how tragic it is. And we pray, Lord, today that in our lesson we will learn how to comfort them and what you would have us to do. Lord, be with our lesson this morning. Guide us with your Spirit. Be with James. Bless him for preparing. And we ask you, Lord, all this in the name of Jesus Christ, our Savior.
So we kind of come to the end of the story of Lazarus' resurrection today. Although it's not really the end. There's a little bit more to talk about with Lazarus after today's lesson, so I'm going to give you a little bit of a preview about what we'll talk about tonight. Chapter 12, we have some things going on with Lazarus and his family that are a result of what we have today. So tonight we're going to go into chapter 12, then to chapter 11, and then go into chapter 12. So just be prepared for that tonight. So today in our lesson, we've gone through the process of Jesus hearing about Lazarus' sickness, him talking to both Mary and Martha, and then last week him getting ready to head to the natural cemetery, the tomb. So today, that's where we begin our lesson, is Jesus in the presence of the mourners at the tomb. And I like that idea, right? Jesus is in the presence of the mourners. What does Jesus say in the Beatitudes about those that mourn? They shall be comforted. Blessed are those that mourn, for they shall be comforted. We're seeing that lived out today in our lesson today, that Jesus is comforting the mourners. Now, we saw that last week when Jesus, a week before when Jesus was talking to Martha, and last week his interaction with the disciples and Mary, and now we're going to see that in person with him at the site of Lazarus' tomb. And we're going to go through the first couple of verses kind of slow, because I want to understand Jesus' response. You know, growing up and learning John 11:35, Jesus wept. What does it mean that Jesus wept? Why was he weeping? And there's a couple of answers there that we can study in our lesson. So let's look at verses 33 through 35, and then we'll stop there and discuss them.
Therefore, when Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who came with her weeping, he groaned in the spirit and was troubled. And he said, "Where have you laid him?" They said to him, "Lord, come and see." Jesus wept.
So, Jesus observes things, right? He sees things. And that's how we begin this verse, is that Jesus therefore saw. He saw her weeping, and he saw the Jews that were there that were weeping, that came with her. Now, these Jews may have been friends, they may have been visitors, they may have been people that we know that we're going to read about tonight that had gone back, that will wind up going back to Jerusalem to talk to the Pharisees about this event. But as part of the Shiva process, which is in the Jewish aspect today, people come to the house of those that mourn and mourn with them. They mourned with them, and as we read last week, they were heading to the cemetery. They thought Mary was leaving, so they followed Mary. Mary went to talk to Jesus, and now they're still with them as they go to the tomb. So, he sees them weeping, and the word there, his response to that weeping was that he groaned in the spirit. Now, the lesson says that word can have multiple meanings, right? To be in anguish, to be sad, but also to be what?
To murmur against.
To murmur against. That was one, yes. And there was another one, another idea that that word carries with it.
To be angry.
Anger. Anger. I don't see anger here, and I don't see where they get that, but that's okay. The lesson has two different authors of commentary that say that Jesus may very well have been mad at the effects of sin. Death being the effect of sin. I don't know that. I read that in this verse. Have any of you ever been troubled to the point where you just groan and you feel it in your gut? Or is that just me? Robert gives me a yes. Thank you, Robert. Most of mine is self-inflicted. Mine is when I've said something out of place or said, it's like what we talked the other day about saying something at a funeral, and you say the wrong thing at a funeral, some garbage just comes out, and then maybe an hour or 30 minutes or even 5 minutes later, you're sitting in the car going, oh, I wish I hadn't said that, it hurt so bad. So that groaning may have been anger at myself, it may have been me not being sensitive to the situation or something else, something that I caused. But that's not the kind of groaning Jesus is going through. It's not anything that he caused, right? What is he groaning at? What is he, when he sees Mary crying, and he sees the Jews crying, why is his spirit troubled?
It's a painful thing to watch somebody hurt like that. And he loved Mary. And he is understanding, I think, what she's going through.
I think the idea that Jesus is familiar with all of our pains, with all of our hurts, with all of our troubles and trials, and he knows them. This is him knowing Mary's, right? This is him knowing Martha's. This is him knowing exactly what Lazarus went through to get to this point. But the interesting thing that the writer of the exposition put up, he said, well, Jesus knew he was going to be healed in the next few minutes. He knew he was going to be resurrected. So was he sad about that? Was he upset with Lazarus being dead when he knew he was going to be resurrected in a few minutes?
Maybe he knew Lazarus was in a better place than they were back to the sinful world.
That's one part of the story we don't get to talk about. We're going to talk about that it's not talked about. Go ahead, Gary.
I always thought that he wept because it was his decision to delay the healing, which caused so much pain for those he loved too.
I think it's a great way of looking at it. Yes. That this had to happen, and that's painful. Sometimes things that have to happen aren't great. I mean, you get your wisdom teeth removed. Man, that hurts, and you're sick, and you have to go through that mess. But it has to happen to prevent something worse from happening later on. This was like one of those events that had to happen, and it hurts when it does. Maybe that was his cause to weep. We don't have very many, only two that I can think of. Jesus weeping over Jerusalem, and this instance here, weeping at the tomb of Lazarus, where Jesus' sadness, trouble comes out. If there's another one, I'm not trying to say that those are the only two, but I can't think of any off the top of my head. Those are the ones that I'm reminded of. So the Jews are going to see him cry, and they're going to have a response to that. Right? They're going to see Jesus crying, and they're going to say, well, something we're going to read. I just want us to try to understand why Jesus was crying. Usually the Jews don't get it right. they don't hit the nail on the head with their assumptions. I just want to make sure that we have a little better idea of why Jesus was upset, why he was troubled in the spirit, why it would be so painful to him. To have John write it down as he groaned in the spirit and troubled. This wasn't anything that was light or easy for Jesus. It was something that bore weight on him. All right, so let's look at the next two verses there, 36 and 37.
Then said the Jews, Behold, how he loved him. And some of them said, Could not this man which opened his eyes to the blind have caused that even this man should not have died?
Have we heard verse 37 before? Who has said that already?
Martha and Mary and the crowd. Now the crowd that sees Jesus.
Yes, this is the time we heard from the crowd, we heard from Mary, we heard from Martha. But let's look at that first one. Let's look at verse 36 first. Oh, how this man must have loved Lazarus. Behold, how he loved him. Is that why Jesus is crying? Because he's mourning someone that he loved?
The lesson said he knew he was going to bring him back in just a minute, that it wouldn't make sense for that to be the
It
case.
wouldn't be because he's mourning him, right? Now, it would be perfectly reasonable to say Jesus is crying for all the stuff Lazarus had to go through. To that point, I would think so. Like Chris and Glenn that said it, that said he just had to take Lazarus away from paradise. That would be painful, right? Knowing that Lazarus, who was in Abraham's bosom, hanging out, enjoying somewhat of the presence of God right there, and now he is being pulled back into a painful world where death and sickness and pain all exist. Would that seem, that would be pretty sad, right? That would be a pretty tough thing for Jesus to deal with.
So Lazarus should have been mad when he come back?
Not if the boss tells you to come back. No, I wouldn't say that. If Jesus tells you to come back, you're gung-ho, I'm pretty sure. Although maybe that's why Jesus had to yell at him to get his attention.
I always wondered where he actually was. Did God put him someplace else, to wait?
In the Jewish aspect, a couple of weeks ago, it mentioned that they didn't even think that the spirit was,
Soul. Yeah.
oh,
Yeah.
the soul had left. So maybe he hadn't even made it there yet. I don't
These are
know.
great questions that we don't have answers
But
to.
it was different. I'd always heard before that 3 days, the fourth day is when the soul left, and that's why it was important to wait for them.
Yeah.
And that's when they would notice that the body would start stinking.
Yeah, the
And
decomposition.
they talk about that way. Up to 7 days, or they're different. I didn't know.
Yeah, all kinds of weird ideas. Again, these are all ideas that people have kind of come up with to try to deal with this grieving process and to try to handle the idea of death. We all handle that in different ways. And I don't know. I don't know where Lazarus was. I can't answer that question with 100% authority or assurance. God was taking care of him. Whether he let him somewhere else or let him sleep, or he was in, like we read in Jesus' parable of Lazarus and the rich man, different Lazarus. Lazarus the rich man, he was in Abraham's bosom enjoying a version of paradise. I don't have an answer to that. And whether the Jews here, I don't think they understood it either. And then their response to Jesus, as Jesus comes to the tomb, was, well, isn't this the prophet? Isn't this the guy that went around healing people? And these people bore witness to a lot of that. The blind being, and the lame being healed, the paralytic healed, the guys with leprosy that were healed. They bore witness to that. So their idea of Jesus mourning over this guy is contrasted with the ideas of why didn't he heal him? Why is he even mourning? I mean, couldn't this guy have done that? So I want to look at page 175 for a second before we move to the next section. There are a couple of thoughts here in the commentary that I want to share. First paragraph on 175. For many people, it is inconceivable that God could grieve over the sorrowful things that befall people and still have sovereign power over all that happens. They falsely conclude that either he is unable to prevent the afflictions and calamities that come into our lives, or he does not care about them. Either way, he is considered unworthy of worship and faith, and the road is deemed clear for people to pursue their own desires and agendas with no restraints of any kind. Why would a good God allow this terribly bad thing to happen? Much like what the Jews asked right there. Right? If he was so good and he was so powerful, couldn't he have saved him from dying? If he was truly the prophet that has all this power, why did he let this person that he loved die? Now, do we hear that today? That kind of sentiment today? All the garbage that goes on in the world around us? You hear people who are non-believers say, well, if God was real, why would he let a disease or let someone die in a car wreck or let whatever happen?
Did you see on 174, the very last paragraph where it says Satan has caused death and sorrow?
Mm-hmm.
Where does it say that?
174,
left,
first column, last paragraph.
Well, he did it through the deception of Adam and Eve, no doubt.
Yeah, the wages of sin is what that is. And that's where I kind of struggled with the lesson talking about Jesus crying over the effects of sin. He's not crying over the effects of Lazarus' sin or anybody else that was there, but the state of the fallen world because of Satan's deception of Adam and Eve. And I believe that's what that is referring to right there, is that since Satan convinced Adam and Eve to sin, death, destruction, and all this garbage that we even see today has its root back in that. Satan caused that. Now, God uses it. Obviously, God's using death of Lazarus to tell a much bigger story, right? Why would Lazarus die? Well, if you go back far enough, it's because of sin, because of Adam's sin, that man had to die. That's why Lazarus died. But the bigger picture is that Jesus is using that death, that terrible thing, to tell a story about himself. Does that make sense? That God can use the effects of sin to tell a much bigger and better and more glorious story than just the destruction and death that we see today. I just make that up. I mean, no one's even giving me that. It's tough. It's a tough thought, right? When you're in the middle of that, it's a very tough thought. It's hard to see out of the immediate, to see the bigger, to see the better. Let's look at the next paragraph on page 175 again. It is exasperating to witness the attitudes of people who refuse to acknowledge what is good and right because their hearts are predisposed to evil intentions. No, we're kidding. That is a tough one, right? It's hard, it's frustrating. We get angry and upset and we get wrapped up in it when we see people refuse to see things like God allows us to see. There is a war going on in our own culture between goodness, justice, and righteousness on one side, and wickedness, lawlessness, corruption, and evil on the other. Amen. Scripture indicates that this conflict will become more and more intense as we get closer to the final days. Of course, that's the reminder in 1 Timothy. All of this is leading up to the time of the tribulation as described in Revelation. So, in context of the lesson, the fact of Lazarus' death and how these two different approaches to that exist at the same time. The approach of the Pharisees and the Jews who see it one way, and the approach of Jesus and even Mary and Martha seeing it a different way. Mary and Martha weren't seeing the immediate resurrection, but they see the long-term fulfillment of God's promises. They had that. So that's good. That's wonderful. They just didn't see the immediate, that Jesus was going to use Lazarus for something right now. And then you have the Jews and the folks who are not believing, who are not seeing how any of this can be good, how it's all weird, and how why did this guy save him if he loved him so much? It was a cultural war, just like we see today. So, now comes what the lesson calls the time of action. So Jesus is still upset. Jesus still has that same word that's translated groaning going on in verse 38. So someone read 38 through the first part of 41.
Jesus therefore, again groaning in himself, cometh to the grave. It was a cave, and the stone lay upon it. Jesus said, Take ye away the stone. Martha, the sister of him that was dead, said unto him, Lord, by this time he stinketh, for he hath been dead 4 days. Jesus said unto her, Said I not unto thee that, and thou wouldst believe, thou shouldest see the glory of God? Then they took away the stone from the place where the dead was laid.
Thank you. The King James can be hard to read with all the S's and the thus and the thous. Jesus again has that emotional gut response, something deep inside where it's maybe a mixture of sadness and pain and anger when he sees that the Jews accuse him of not caring. So that's kind of what they're doing, right? They accused him of not being there, not doing what he said he could do, or what he's proved that he can do. So all of that's welling up inside of him, and at that point he arrives at the tomb. Now, I think this is neat because that picture we saw last week, it says it was a cave, but the stone lay on top of it. So maybe it was kind of a hole in the ground that went down and the stone was on top of it. I don't know. It's what it says. The stone lay upon it.
You said that this one?
Yeah, verse 38. It was
Oh,
a
the
cave.
scripture said that this one.
Yeah,
I was going to say, I don't remember the commentary.
Yeah, we talked about it last Sunday night. We had a picture of what is considered Lazarus' tomb, and there's a stairwell leading down to it. There's a doorway and a stairwell, and then a hole in the ground, and more steps. I was like, oh. I don't know how much is actually accurate or not. That was a neat idea. So, what does Jesus say? First thing he says here in verse 39, take away the stone. Why is Martha the one to respond?
She's the oldest of the family. She's the elder, and they had to have permission.
According to the lesson, and that was the cultural norm at the time, is that she had to give permission for this stone to be moved away. She was the one that had it sealed up as the next of kin, or the one responsible, and now she had to give permission for it to be removed. And was she ready to give permission for it to be removed? Not really. Not quite yet, was she? She's like, Jesus, you sure you want to do this? 4 days is a long time. And the natural decomposition of a human body is going to have some smell to it. It's going to be disturbing, Jesus. Are you sure you want to do that? So Martha's still not seeing the immediate effects of Jesus' words. She's still not seeing the idea that Jesus said, I'm going to raise him up. She's still thinking of that long-term general resurrection, something that's going to come at the end times.
Something the lesson brought out that I thought was pretty interesting was that her concern there was a practical one in harmony with her personality. She's the cleaner, the doer, and she's thinking, oh no, that's gonna make everybody here ceremonially unclean.
Not just ceremonially unclean, it's going to be bad.
Yes.
So yeah, that does fit with Martha, doesn't it? From what we know about Martha, that does fit her personality. Seems to anyway. That's, yeah, pretty good. So, and then Jesus responds back to her. Verse 40. Didn't I tell you, don't you remember me telling you that if you believe, you would see the glory of God? Well, of course she remembered that. And of course she was thinking about something down the road, right? Something that was not today. Oh gosh, how often do we miss perspective on Jesus' promises? Sometimes we're easy when we think, oh yes, God's going to give me something down the road. It's going to be resurrection. It's going to be something later on. Do we have more trouble thinking about something God's promised us for today? Sometimes we do. Now, there's the other end of that spectrum too, is that sometimes we get so focused on God doing something for us right now that we lose sight of the eternal, that we're focused on one or the other. And I don't blame her. I don't blame her for looking far-sighted rather than looking nearsighted in this instance, because I see myself doing that quite a bit. But he reminds her that you're going to see the glory of God. Guess what? You're going to see it right now. You're going to see it today. So we infer then that she gave them permission, because the next verse has them taking the stone away from the entrance to the tomb. That's verse 41, first part. So, any other parts in that section you guys want to underline or want to share before we get to the last group? All right, we'll move on to the last half of verse 41 and through 44. Who would read those last few verses?
Jesus lifted up his eyes and said, Father, I thank thee that thou hast heard me, and I knew that thou hast heard me always. Because of the people who stand my eyes, that they may believe that thou hast sent me. And when he had thus spoken, he cried with a loud voice, Lazarus, come forth. And he that was dead came forth, bound hand and foot with grave clothes, and his face was bound about with a napkin. Jesus said unto him, Loose him, and let him go.
Thank you, Ms. Carol. So what part of Jesus' prayer do we not hear? That Jesus said, I thank you that you've already heard it.
Could have been the night before.
Or there from 4 days ago.
Yeah, the prayer from 4 days ago that was Lazarus's, Lord, please let Lazarus, or Lord, allow Lazarus, or however Jesus interacted with his Father, that said Lazarus was going to be resurrected. That's the part of the prayer we don't hear here, but we hear that Jesus said, God, I know you heard it. God, I know you heard it when I prayed it, and I know you always hear me. What comforting words, right? We said those that mourn will be comforted. Man, we need to hear these words and be comforted by them too. You thank God for hearing your prayers? Even when the answer isn't immediate? Even when the answer may come some time off? God, I know you hear my prayers. I know you always hear them. Thank you for that. And then in verse 42, what does he say the purpose of this is? What the purpose of him even speaking right now is so that those that are standing by, that they may believe that you've said. The purpose of him even using those words, thanking God for hearing him, in addition to the miracle that's getting ready to happen, the purpose of that is to confirm Jesus is dead and that people would believe. And we're going to read tonight how many did. We're going to read about that tonight. We don't get to read it in the lesson today. We'll read about it again tonight. So that they may believe that thou hast sent me. And now, verse 43. Jesus does something here that's a little bit out of character, that we don't hear him yelling or speaking loudly. Most of the time we hear Jesus teaching in a very calm voice. Most of the quotes that we have for Jesus are in a teaching environment where he's having interaction with folks. This is something that's a little different. Verse 43, and when he thus had spoken that prayer, he spoke to him. He cried with a loud voice. Mikey, you want to sing it? I know you are, because I have been all week. That's one of those things that gets, kind of stuck. It is. Lazarus, come forth. Y'all gonna sing that for us tonight? So he cries out with a loud voice, Lazarus, come forth. Why in the world did Jesus have to use his loud outside voice? There were three.
They were outside.
They were outside.
Oh, he could have whispered it and he still would.
It still could. Where was it in the lesson that talked about the three reasons why? Oh, there it is, under guiding the superintendent.
They were listening, nobody could have heard them.
Nobody in the crowd, evidently there was a big crowd that was around. It's kind of hard to speak over a big crowd unless you use some volume there. On page 185, after he prayed, Jesus cried, this is on the second column, middle paragraph. Commentators suggest several possible reasons for why he shouted these words. Some say it was to picture death as a deep sleep from which Lazarus could not awaken without a shout from Jesus. Others suggest the shout emphasizes the power required to raise him. Still others think it was intended to alert the crowd to what was about to take place. Big fan of the last one. Let's just take that for whatever it's worth. That's what Mr. Winter said.
I think it's to show his power. I mean, just to show the,
It does shut everybody up when you raise your voice, doesn't it? You know, there were people just in their mourning and in their milling around. There was a volume there of stuff that wasn't necessarily useful or helpful. So Jesus broke through that with a very loud crowd. So yeah, Juliana, that would give an idea of his authority over the whole situation, gives an idea of his power and his command over not just Lazarus and his body, but the whole crowd. Everything that was going on. I think that's a very, very, very good analysis of that.
Paul tells us that before the resurrection of believers, that he'll come with a shout, with the voice of an archangel,
Yep.
and the dead of Christ will rise first.
So, are they going to call everybody's name individually, or are they just going to say, come forth to everybody? What would the lesson has that idea of what would have happened if Jesus said, come forth,
They didn't put Lazarus.
and didn't put Lazarus' name in front of it? Everybody, all the dead would have risen that day. I don't know if that's true. Jesus has his. Do it. Yes, the walking dead. That would have been really, really a strange event. Again, this was out of the ordinary, but people have all kinds of interesting thoughts that they share about stuff like that. But Jesus had a design on it. Go ahead, Julie.
how do you think he came forward? He was bound hand and foot.
Hopping.
Or,
Throw that.
Like a worm, or he hopped. I don't know. Yeah, he couldn't walk.
I know.
Yeah, it was.
The same way they found the boat at the shore.
The same.
If the tomb that they celebrate as Lazarus is real,
Yeah.
you would have to crawl up the steps.
Yeah. And there wouldn't have been any good way of him proceeding out of that, and I believe that's why the very next verse Jesus says, get him out of all that. Look at him, here he's coming, get him out of all that. I mean, he's bound at his feet, he's bound at his hands, he has a cloth over his head, he can't see, his arms are tied up around him. It's not going to be very easy at all. I've heard comedians talk about him hopping out of the tomb, and just the idea that he was wrapped in his grave clothes, that's biblical. He could not move. He could not move normal without
I think the Lord just put him. I think the Lord just put him there.
put him where?
He just materialized out of the tomb.
Just moved him out.
Yeah, I think he did. I think he sort of floated him out.
Yeah, what was? Yeah, why would we argue? I mean, yeah. And he that was dead came forth, bound hand and foot with grave clothes, and his face was bound with a napkin. And Jesus said, loose him and let him go.
It came forth appears to imply that they saw movement.
Yeah. Whether it was his own or generated by another power, I can't answer. It would have been, and obviously Jesus had to respond to that, get him out of those, loose him and let him go.
He had his mask on.
He sure did. But Jesus told him to take it off. So that last phrase there, does that last phrase, loose him and let him go, resonate with anybody? Does that have an implication for all of us as well? The idea that we were, if you go back to the beginning of the lesson, paying the penalty for our sin, death. And now at the end, Jesus resurrects Lazarus and says, be loosed, get loose, be let go of that. Doesn't that mirror what happens with those that come to Jesus? That we're loosed from the power of sin and let go for service. That's what Lazarus experienced in the physical, and we all get to experience that as well in the spiritual. I think that's really, let him loose. Let him go.
And you look at people that, as soon as they get saved, they can't. You look at somebody who has just gotten saved versus people who've been in this lifestyle for a while, the fire that they have. Because it's like, they are finally set free and they just can't stop. There's nothing holding back.
No. Especially people that have had a pretty good testimony. People that have seen the darkness of their life before. You know, when we're young, we don't really get to thankfully, I did not get to experience the deep darkness of a sinful lifestyle. I was saved very early, and I had God's hand on me from the very beginning. I know that. I'm very thankful for that. But for those who didn't and came to Jesus later in life, that came out of a sinful lifestyle, and they got to see the darkness of sin that surrounded them, that light shines so. That's such a beautiful thing to see. Not that it doesn't shine bright in all of us, but to see the difference between light and dark in that person. All right, any other thoughts? We are out of time, but we have a few seconds here. Anybody wants to share anything else from the lesson? Anything else you picked up?
We have our new books.
Yes, ma'am.
The
There-
rats one.
there are. All right. No one else has any comments? We'll prepare for worship. Sandra, will you dismiss us?
Father, I pray that we prepare our hearts as we come to worship. I pray for Brother Bob as he brings your word this morning. Father, I pray that you would be with those who could not be with us today for whatever reason. I pray for those who are suffering from sorrow, those who are suffering from pain. I thank you, Lord, for how you've blessed us in many, many ways. And Father, how I just hope that we can continue to serve you and to be the witness that you would have us to be. May our lives show the example of Christ, and Lord, may you lead us each and every day. In Christ's name I pray. Amen.
Into chapter 11 and chapter 12. We're ready for that this evening. Chapter 11 and chapter 12.